Good evening, everybody. A very warm welcome to the fourth instalment of our property webinar. I know we had a few before Christmas. If anybody is listening in audio-only mode or has missed any of the previous episodes, or indeed wants to see this particular episode, you can by going to the £2.73 Facebook page and getting the link to our YouTube site, where we've obviously got every instalment, and we'll keep adding them as we go along on there right now. So just waiting for a few more people to join us here. So in the meantime, I'm joined by obviously Karen Newton and Peter Rowlands, and today we're going to talk about Multilet and HMO. We're going to give a brief overview of what I would call the global Multilet strategy, followed by subsequent episodes which will then have a dissection of each particular subject in greater detail. Multilet for me is where my passion lies, really, as far as property investment goes, because it's kind of like residential investment with the volume turned right up. It's a lot more work, it's a lot more effort, but the rewards for it are far, far greater. So it's something that I'm really, really into. So fantastic news. I think now, the time being 33 minutes past 7, we will press on. Like I say, there's the three of us here. We're on the panel. If you've got any questions about anything that we speak about, please put them into the chat box. I'd be more than happy, myself, Karen and Peter, be more than happy to answer those questions for you. And indeed, our contact details are on here. So if you think of anything after or you're watching a recording of this, then please feel free to email any of us with any information which you may actually need. As I say, today we're looking at HMO and we're looking at Multilet. I mean, Multilet could be HMOs as well, but they've kind of, because of the Housing Act, they've kind of segmented each other on there. So I just want to go over a very brief overview and look at Multilet. Now, Multilet, by definition, is a property whereby there are two or more persons or families sharing it. It can be self-contained flats, it can be bedsits, it can be studios, or it can be an HMO. An HMO is a house of multiple occupancy, which means that you have anything more than two persons or families living in that particular house, quite often sharing lounges, sharing kitchens, sharing bathrooms. Obviously, self-contained flats and studios, bedsits, etc. are slightly different. So it's great from an investment point of view, because it means your yield that you get for that particular property, your monthly income versus the property value, is far higher on multi-let properties than it will be on single-let. That said as well, it is harder to manage, there's more work involved, but I suppose you get back what you actually put in anyway, so that's what we're actually looking at. So just to move on now, what is multi-let?
So, can I just pop in here, Ben?
Yes, certainly.
Obviously, Multilet and HMO, I'd just say to anyone who's listening that you are the specialist in this. I'm not, because it's not a strategy that I actually use with property. But just one of the questions I want to ask on this is, my understanding, every council has its own rules?
Yes.
Is that right?
Indeed, indeed. Now, there are what we call the statutory ruling for HMOs. It came in 2004 with the Housing Act. And then there are what we call individual licensing. This is where every single council has their own definition of these particular rules. Now, it was changed in 2018. It was originally brought in 2004, changed last year. But a lot of people say, well, how many people can you have in a house without a license? How many floors can the house be without a license? How can this work? How can that work? I'm going to cover that in greater detail when we get on to HMOs now, okay? But what's important is that with a lot of multi-let properties, and there are certain rulings, for example, the portion of properties that are owner-occupied in a particular unit or block, plus building regulations, etc., dictate whether sometimes maybe even a Victorian conversion, a Victorian house has been recently converted to say, let's say 3 one-bedroom flats. Depending upon circumstances, that may actually require an HMO license. Although you're not actually running an HMO because they are 3 self-contained flats, it may require an HMO license. So that's something to bear in mind here. Now, a multi-let is a property of 2 houses, a property that's occupied by 2 or more independent persons or families. It's self-contained. Normally, each individual or each family within that particular unit will have their own individual tenancy agreement. So it's not like renting a house like traditionally students used to many years ago, where, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, 8 of them maybe would club together. They would rent a house, they'd have one tenancy, and then obviously the problems that are associated with that is if somebody drops out, they've got to replace that person, because the poor bugger that signed the original tenancy is ultimately responsible for the rent each month. So it's much, much better when you segregate it, you turn it into an HMO or into a multi-let, where you're only responsible for your own rent. So you've got to honour your own tenancy agreement in there. So you've got to obviously stay for the first 6 months and then give them a month's notice thereafter, look after your own room, and likewise look after communal rooms. But at least you have the freedom to move on, to move out if you so wish to, and you're not bound by anybody else's movements. That's really important there. Planning, compliance and licensing. You've just touched on that, Karen. Like I say, with multi-let, we've got to make sure that we've got the correct, first of all, the correct planning permission in place. Now, that's vitally important. A lot of people think, well, I could change this 3-bedroom terraced house into 2 1-bedroom flats, or I could make this 3-bedroom terraced house into a 4 or 5-bed HMO. But the important thing is, and since 2016, when, for example, in the whole of Wales, when the Welsh Assembly government changed the planning legislation, you could no longer go from what they called C3 to C4. C3 is a traditional residential dwelling, a house, a flat, designed for one person, a couple, a family, etc. C4 is an HMO. And what you could do is, providing you have no more than 6 bedrooms, you could automatically change that C3 residential dwelling to a C4 HMO. You had to obviously get involved with compliance and local licensing. So you have to approach your local borough council and say to them, what steps do I need to take? And they would say to you, well, first of all, the rooms need to be, for example, in Newport, and I'll use this as an example because I'm quite au fait with the licensing rules around here. You would need to put, each bedroom would need to be at least 6.5 square metres. Anything smaller than that can't be a licensed bedroom. Then you would need things like a fire alarm system. You would need half-hour fire doors for each of the bedrooms. You would need intermittent strips and brushes on the doors, depending whether it's for the kitchen or for the bedroom, etc., etc. You would also need a certain amount of linear workspace in the kitchen for each resident. You would need a certain number of bathrooms for each resident, so that, for example, if you had an 8-bedroom property, let's just say, you couldn't have just one bathroom, because that would be obviously quite unfair, but it wouldn't reach the actual licensing criteria either. So
do you need to put anything into each bedroom in the way of an ensuite or anything like that?
No, with an HMO, providing the bedroom is 6.5 metres squared, it must comply with building regulations. So, of course, the bedroom must have an opening window, for example. The bedroom must have a heat source in there, be it an electric heating system or gas central heating. But you don't need to have a kitchen in there. You don't need to have an ensuite bathroom in there. You would just need to have the relevant fire detection equipment in there, plus obviously the half-hour fire door. Furniture is another thing. You don't need, by legislation, to put furniture in there, but we've always found that unless, for example, in an HMO, you do put furniture in there, it's very hard to actually rent it, because most people that do rent rooms in HMOs expect there to be a bed. Well, what we used to do, for example, was put a bed, a chest of drawers, a wardrobe, and a bedside table in there. Now, if they wanted to bring a television table or a computer bench or whatever the case was, that was entirely down to them. But we would put the basic furniture, a little bit like a budget hotel, if you like. We would put that in there for them, and then they would have use of the communal kitchen, communal lounge, and obviously bathrooms in there too.
Okay.
So we've just looked at that, and that's obviously, we're still talking about multi-let now. What are the costs of making these changes? Well, the costs of making these changes can quite often be significant. However, what you must look at is not your initial upfront cost, but you must look at a whole life cost of this and obviously a payback. So, for example, if you turned a 3-bedroom terraced house into a 5 or 6 bedroom HMO, instead of getting, let's say, £500-600 per calendar month, you could be ending up getting somewhere in the region of £2,000 per calendar month. So what you've got to do is examine the payback time in the difference in the rents achieved on there. I'll talk a bit more about that when we get onto HMOs now. If we look at this now, this is a traditional property here. Now, these make absolutely ideal HMOs, okay? This property here, for example, is in Newport. It used to be, obviously, a C3 residential dwelling. Now, the problem with properties like these today is they don't really suit families. They're very big, sizable. It looks quite small from the outside, but they're like a TARDIS inside. It doesn't really suit modern family living because you've got, as you can see there, you've got no off-street car parking. You've got a very, very small garden, and you've got a huge house. So whilst adults aren't so bothered about the garden, they can walk to the park or the pub beer garden or whatever the case is, families wouldn't traditionally go for these particular houses. And as you see on the photograph on the right there, we've changed. A lot of people still think of HMO, oh, renting out rooms, bed sits, squats, squalor. A lot of HMOs that we see now in our principal cities, I mean, you know, places like London, Swindon, Bristol, and it's coming through to Newport now where people are actually mimicking that, and they're putting really high quality furnishings in there, making the properties very luxurious. So you do attract higher rents from professional people who want to live in them. So it's really important. With HMOs, again, the definition is a property that houses 2 or more independent persons or families. The HMO Housing Act that I spoke about earlier came in 2004 because what was happening, and sadly still happens today quite a lot, is you get many, many people, and they call them illegal HMOs now, renting out properties. And there was, I saw a report just this week in a newspaper, and it was a 4-bedroom house, I believe, in North London with 22 people living in it. Now, obviously, the first thing that we think of is health and safety, and basic human etiquette is wrong on every single level. So whilst a lot of people say, well, the HMO Housing Act that came in 2004 is very stringent, it's very hard to adhere to, it makes sure that we give our tenants a comfortable, safe and secure living environment, which I think is absolutely vital from a fire safety point of view, from a health and safety point of view. We must adhere to the HMO Housing Act, and indeed the specific licensing that our local borough makes sure that we remain compliant with. Okay. Again, in an HMO, you'll typically find that there will not be one general tenancy agreement. I would have a particular problem myself if somebody said to me, well, if you sign for the 6 bedrooms, collect the rent off the other 5 tenants and we'll see how we go. I feel pretty nervous. I would much prefer to be in an HMO whereby we have individual tenancy agreements. So I'm in control of my particular personal space, my bedroom, obviously sharing the communal areas, but I can come and go as I please them within the terms of that particular tenancy. Again, planning, compliance and licensing, we've covered that, but it is very important in HMOs that we remain compliant from a fire safety point of view, from an environmental health safety point of view, and obviously to keep our HMO license in place. It's really important. People wanting to flout the HMO licensing laws will find they'll have their license revoked from them. And of course, as a result of that, they will no longer be able to operate that property as an HMO.
Then how long do the HMO licenses last for?
It varies from council to council. In Newport, Torvine, Blaen y Gwent, Caerphilly, they all last 5 years.
The cost for getting your HMO license?
Varies from council to council, £395 up to about £900.
Right, okay.
And that's just for the license application. The inspector, who will be part of some larger councils actually have an HMO team now. Okay, if they don't, it'll be dealt with by environmental health and housing. So they'll send an inspector around once you've obviously done the necessary works to your HMO. They'll send an inspector around. The inspector will then look around the property, make sure that everything is in place it should be. They will then grant the actual license, and they will subsequently revisit your property on an ad hoc basis to make sure that you are sticking to the terms of it and there's nothing untoward happening within that particular house. So,
sorry, more questions. I know we'll go into more depth on some of these, but just for people who are listening at the moment. Common areas, what do you need to supply in common areas?
Well, this varies depending on the type of HMO that you're actually running, because we've got quite a broad spectrum here. Okay, so what we look at with HMOs is what is our target market here. Now, as a general rule of thumb, you can go completely over the top and you can provide a luxury HMO, which in the communal areas you have televisions, you have sofas, obviously a dining table and chairs is essential, as is a fully fitted kitchen. Some of them choose to have obviously a washer in there, some have a washer dryer, some have a dishwasher, some provide plates, crockery, cutlery, some, it just, where does it actually end? But basically what I'd say you've got to have is a proper fully functioning kitchen. We used to put a brand new magnet kitchen into our HMOs, and then from there we would then provide oven, hob, extractor, washer, and we would provide microwave, kettle and toaster. Now, if the tenants want to bring a coffee percolator in, if they want to bring anything like that and put it in the kitchen, that's entirely down to them. But we would provide everything they need, apart from plates, cutlery, glass, etc. We would provide everything they need to be able to cook, to be able to clean, etc. in those communal areas. We did, on one occasion, put a television in, but obviously you've got to remember, if you put a television into a communal area, you as the landlord or the letting agent for that particular property is responsible for a TV license. So that's obviously an additional cost there. And
I presume you've got the same if you put internet in or something like that as well?
You don't have to have a television license if you put internet in. It's only if you have an actual television set that's been provided by you. Okay. Internet, I was just going to come to that, is absolutely essential. You will not rent rooms in an HMO without broadband. I used to joke and say, well, we could tell people there's no running water here. They ask you whether it's got broadband. Fine, I'll move in. Broadband internet is absolutely essential in HMOs. I would say to anyone that thinks about not providing it to think very, very carefully, because the amount of money it costs you versus the obviously effect it has upon the rentability of your rooms is huge. Just want to go back to a topic that we came to earlier. In all of this, it's really essential that we actually look at planning permission. Okay, as I said, you could previously go from a C3 residential dwelling to a C4 HMO, provided it was no more than 6 bedrooms, if you complied with the local housing authority's HMO compliance guide, apart from if you were in what they call an Article 4 directive area. Now, Article 4 directive was set up to stop the oversupply of HMOs. They were finding in certain towns or certain regions, in certain towns and cities in the UK, there was street upon street after street of houses that were all HMOs. And they decided that was not good for obviously the demographics of the area. So they put Article 4 into certain areas. What they did in Wales, the Welsh Assembly government in 2016, removed the ability to be able to change a C3 residential dwelling to a C4 6 or lower bedroom. So now, if you want to provide a property that will have 2 or more independent persons or families living in it, you need planning. Now, planning permission is not that difficult to actually achieve, but the stumbling block we found ourselves working within the NP postcode, the Newport postcode area and the surrounding areas, is that their requirement for car parking. Now, car parking is a major issue because, like I showed you on that picture earlier, of those houses, there's never really any off-street car parking. If you were to buy a house of that size with that amount of accommodation that had off-street car parking, the chances are the figures wouldn't stack up to turn it into an HMO. You would sell it for far more money to an owner-occupier. Now, unfortunately, if you wanted now, which you could do perfectly legally before, convert a 3-4 bedroom terraced house into a 6-bedroom HMO, today you would need 7 off-street car parking spaces. Now, we've argued until we're blue in the face with these people about whether that's right or wrong. At one time, we had almost 60 bedrooms in the city of Newport. I went to a planning application. They told me we would need 7 car parking spaces. I said, we've just done a census of our tenants, and out of almost 60 rooms, we have 2 car owners. You're telling me in a 6-bedroom HMO, we need 7 car parking spaces. I didn't get a justifiable answer. I got pointed to the legislation in writing. Stroke of the shoulders, that's that. So, since 2016, it's become particularly difficult with the new planning legislation in Wales to actually turn properties into HMOs. Now, don't get me wrong. If, like we had done on many, many occasions, you've taken a property, you've converted it from C3 to C4 prior to February 2016, it still stands. They can't revoke the license or turn it back to a family home because it's got obviously pre-existing use of that. It just means that we can't look at properties today in the same way that we used to prior to February 2016.
Right. Well, they're making it really more and more complicated, aren't they?
They are indeed, indeed. Now, what I'm going to do, we've done a really brief overview now of obviously HMO and Multilet to help people understand what they are, because I know that when you don't work in the property industry and people start quoting what I used to call TLAs, 3-letter abbreviations, about everything, and there's the HMO and this and that, and LHA tenants and DSS, and it's very difficult to get a good understanding if you're not in the property industry. So I really hope today's session has just cleared up what a Multilet is, and obviously what an HMO, a house of multiple occupancy, actually is too. So if anyone's got any questions, please fire them at us now. Our next session will be in about a fortnight's time, subject to date, but we will keep you informed. If you look at the £2.73 Facebook page, we'll have adverts on there for our next session where we'll start dissecting. I know a lot of information came across today, it's very vague, but we'll start dissecting each of the points that I've actually spoken about, from obviously Multilet. How do you start in Multilet? How would you convert a property to Multilet? How would you go for the planning permission? How would you get the licensing? How would you get the tenants? And how, above all, would you make it a profitable investment for you? Peter and Karen, have you got any questions for us thus far?
No, go ahead, Pete.
No, I just said I'm fine. I'm okay.
Great.
No, and you answered mine as we were going along. So, I've got lots of information there.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, like I say, if anybody does have any questions, please just feel free to email us, put them on the Facebook or the website page. My contact details are on the screen right now, so if anyone wants to make a quick note of this. If anyone has missed this session or missed previous sessions or missed future sessions, then please feel free to go onto the £2.73 Facebook page and download the link to YouTube so you can have a look at the sessions at your will. So if that's it then.
Before we go.
Yes.
We have a property seminar coming up on
my mistake, I forgot.
Right, 2nd and 3rd of March, we have a 2-day seminar which is being held in St. Mellons Bar and Golf Course. Well, not on the course, in the club.
Hotel. Yeah, the St. Mellons Hotel. Yeah, which is on the A48, just past Castleton. Very close to Cardiff, to Newport.
Right, day 1, we will be doing a lot of this type of information on generally buying properties, renovating properties, looking at different strategies. Then day 2, we will be covering the use of options. So options is a great way of getting into property if you haven't got any money.